Well, good morning. You survived the onslaught of water. My goodness, I was like, when will it end? I don't know if it will ever end. When will it shut off? Well, hey, I'm super glad to have you all with us this morning. My name's Seth. I'm one of the pastors here. If you're joining us online, if you're joining us in the room, regardless of how you got here, I just want you to know we are glad that you are here, and you picked a great place to be. You picked a great people to be around. Now, I got to tell you, we all come from different backgrounds, different histories and stories, and I can tell you personally, my family, one of the things that kind of made us unique is that we always had dinner around the table together growing up, and this is back in the day before cell phones. Hard to imagine that you didn't have devices at a table. So we didn't have cell phones. We also didn't have a television in our kitchen. And we didn't have an answering machine for our house phone that was connected, landline. And so when the phone would ring, we'd kind of look at each other like, are we allowed to answer it? And my dad would always say, just let it go. They'll call back if it's important. We just didn't have the FOMO that our culture has right now. And we all ate whatever mom made. She reminded us regularly, I am not a short order cook. So I sat there for an hour staring at green beans at times, wondering how far I could push her. She always won, by the way. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of a background of myself. And you might be wondering, so what did you do during that time? I mean, it was literally, even when my brothers were off in college and I'm home alone in high school, we still had dinner around the table. And so this might sound shocking, but we actually talked to each other. We would have conversations. And one of the things that was, we would debate different things or ask questions about things. And one of the pieces that was a regular part of our dinner was actually an almanac. Anybody remember what an almanac is? It's like a mix of Wikipedia and IMDb all in one concise book. And so we would say, well, who was in that movie, or when did that person die? And so then we would go consult the almanac. Almost every dinner, I feel like we used the almanac for something. And, so that was kind of my childhood. And then I grew up and I got married. And Carrie and my two sisters-in-law, they married into this. Not knowing what they were getting themselves into, because we were a family that was taught to be curious, right? You ask questions, you understand. We were taught to be factual. You don't make statements you can't support. And we were also taught to be a little bit skeptical. If somebody says something that doesn't make sense, you go look it up and you verify, what they're saying. And if you were to ask Carrie about her favorite traits about me, this is not one of them, okay? It is not. I'm just being honest. But I tell you that because I think sometimes my approach, growing up, that can be our approach with God, right? We want the facts. We want the evidence. We don't want to have any doubt. It's like we want God to do something so spectacular that it'll be without a shadow of a doubt. We want to know for sure. And I think sometimes he must wonder, like what? What do you want me to do for you? Do you want me to create a planet that happens to be the only one in our solar system that supports human life, right? That's the perfect 93 million miles away from the sun, so you can have liquid water and life can exist. And it's tilted at the perfect 23.5 degrees, so you can have seasons. And it rotates 24 hours, so you can have day and night. Would that be enough? Or what if I gave you a 576 megapixel camera attached to your face? How about two of those that move around, 100,000 times daily, and muscles to make it move? Did you know that your eye muscles move the equivalent of if you were to walk 50 miles in your legs, right? I mean, that's how much our eye muscles work. And they give us the ability, our eyes give us the ability to see 10 million different colors and shades. It's remarkable. Or what if I gave you a brain that can decipher everything it sees? Or have you ever considered that your brain is actually smarter than your mind? Because by the time I'm finished talking about this, you will have replicated like 50,000 cells in your body and you didn't even know about it. It was completely unconscious to you. But even with all that, we say, no, something truly spectacular, like a miraculous healing. And we forget the fact that we're like a species of miraculous healers, right? I mean, how many ailments actually magically heal themselves in our bodies? I just think that's all really fascinating. So today, we're continuing on in our series, Bystander. And we're looking at the life of John as he traveled with Jesus, and we're trying to see Jesus through the eyes of John, who is one of Jesus' disciples. Now, in our Bibles, the beginning of the New Testament, we have 4 books we call Gospels. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I think they're more like biographies because they're trying to tell us about Jesus' life. And John, who was the last one to write his biography of Jesus' life, he basically comes right out at the end and says, hey, I have an agenda for you. It's not just so you can know all the cool things Jesus said and did. In fact, he tells us his agenda. We've been looking at this every week through the series. He says, these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. I mean, there's something unique, something different. He's not just he's God in a bod, right? He's not just doing cool stuff. He's the Son of God, and that by believing, it'll actually lead you to having life in his name. And so John, he builds his account around these 7 signs we've been talking about through this series. And early on in the book of John, it's easy to identify what the signs are. In fact, one time he says, this is a sign, right? But as you move on, you have to pay a little closer attention. And so we're going to move on today. We're going to get to the 5th sign, which is the healing of a man born blind. And throughout the gospel, what we've said is that Jesus seems to have this pattern of traveling north from the Galilee region of Israel back down south to Jerusalem. It's when he's in Jerusalem that he kind of stirs things up a little bit, stirs the pot, gets the religious people angry, and it becomes a little bit tenuous. So then he travels back up north where maybe they're a little bit more forgiving and kind to Jesus. But every time he's in Jerusalem, you get the idea that it's a little bit risky here, right? I mean, and the reason why it's risky is because Jesus is a threat to their system. Now, 2,000 years ago, Israel was part of the Roman Empire. It was an occupied territory of the Roman Empire. And they have a very tenuous relationship with Rome. Essentially, the Romans have said, okay, religious leaders, if you can keep the peace, we'll stay out of your business, you do your own thing, but we need you to kind of tamp down on the uprisings and stuff. And so the religious leaders, they got, quite honestly, very wealthy doing this, and they had a lot of power and a lot of control. And so when Jesus comes in to upset that, man, does it upset things. So we're back in Jerusalem for this particular sign, and here's what John says. He says, as he went along, he's talking about Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, probably off to the side and out of earshot, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but in this time period, the thought was that sin and suffering were actually connected, that there's a cause and effect relationship. Our decisions, good or bad, lead to either good or bad things in our lives. And quite honestly, we can relate to that a little bit because it probably doesn't take you too much effort to think of something you did in your life that led to some suffering. Maybe you can even think of something you did that led to the suffering of other people. And that's kind of the situation because the disciples are looking at this, and they're looking at this guy who's blind, and they're like, well, obviously somebody sinned in order for this to happen. Did the guy sin in his mother's womb because he was born blind? And was it his parents? And so they're trying to figure this out, and Jesus essentially is going to say, actually, there's no correlation here. He points out, here's what he says. He says, well, neither. That's the wrong thinking. You're all confused. There was no sin here, neither this man, continuing on, nor his parents sinned. Like, you're way off. And then what Jesus does next is he introduces a category for us that, if I can just be fully transparent with you, it is a category that makes me really uncomfortable. And my guess is it might make you uncomfortable as well, because look what he says. He says, but this actually happened so that. Now, when we get to the so that, I shared this a few weeks ago. It's actually a Greek word, hina, which is a purpose clause in Greek. So what Jesus is about to tell us is that there's actually a purpose attached to this man's suffering and pain. There's actually a purpose attached to his parents' suffering and pain, because I can't imagine what it was like to raise a blind man or what it would be like to raise a blind child and the challenges that would be involved in that. And what Jesus is going to tell us is that pain can have a purpose. Perhaps pain always has a purpose. That was certainly this man's situation, and it's possible when you think about your own life and the pain that you've gone through. There are times when, again, we've sinned and we've caused, right? But then there are other times where we're just experiencing pain. And so whatever pain you have or will have or might have, there could be a purpose behind it. And here's the purpose of this man's pain. He says, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now again, that's a really uncomfortable thing, because what he's essentially saying is that God's power can be on display on the stage of human suffering. A couple weeks ago, I shared with you about a friend of mine named Chris, who's a pastor in Ohio, and I've known Chris since I was a teenager. He's about 4 or 5 years younger than I am. He has 5 kids, and he was diagnosed with a very rare form of aggressive leukemia. And I got an email from his Caring Bridge site on Friday giving an update that he went in for a second bone marrow transplant. And in this email, he shares a story of a nurse that he's getting to know. And his prayer request in this email is that we would pray for the opportunities he has to interact with this nurse, because his son had made him a sign. He put it up over the bed, and apparently that sign led to some questions that the nurse was having. Now, don't get me wrong. Chris isn't like, oh, it's all unicorns and rainbows over here. Everything's wonderful. I'm not in any pain or anything like that. No, this is so easy. I'm glad this is happening. That's not his response, and that probably shouldn't be our response either. But my point is that the works of God are being displayed in him in the midst of what he's going through. And there are times where there is no explanation, there is no sin, and yet it's a very powerful story of God at work. That's what's happening with this man. So Jesus, he kind of turns to them and he says this. He says, as long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. To which I think his disciples were like, I thought we were talking about the blind man. Like, I don't understand. How you switched topics on us again, Jesus. We don't fully understand. But he continues. He says this. He says, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And what he's telling them is, look, my identity is never going to be more clear than it is right now. It's never going to be more obvious than it is right now. And right now, the light of the world is exposing the darkness of the world. And there will come a time when I'm not here. And it's going to get dark. Man, it will get really dark. And the truth is, there's a period of time in our world history where it was dark. I mean, after Jesus left the earth. But what he's looking at them and saying is, look, your generation, you have the privilege, you have the opportunity to see it firsthand. You get to experience the light of the world firsthand, so take good notes, because there will be generations of people who follow after you who will want to know. And I don't want them to have to take it on blind faith, so take good notes about what happened. I don't know if Jesus actually said that part, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. Now, this account is actually one of my favorite accounts in the New Testament, and I don't think anybody could make up what happens next. You want to know what happens next? Here's what happens. It's kind of gross. Continuing on. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. I mean, this giant Jesus loogie gets mixed in with a bunch of dirt and put in the guy's eyes. And we have no idea. Did he warn the guy up front? I mean, he's just sitting there, probably asking, begging, and suddenly he's got this stuff in his eyes. Does he even know? But Jesus, he speaks to him, and says, go, wash in the pool of Siloam. And in making this statement, which is really kind of a request, this man is asked to do what generations of people will be asked to do for the future. That is to walk by faith, not by sight. And he has to make the decision, will I trust this man whom I can't see based on the rumors about Jesus that I have heard? And you know what, my friends, our challenge is really the same. And this blind man, he chose to trust someone he could not see because of the rumors he's heard. And do you know what happens? John says this, so the man went, and he washed, and he came home seeing. It's a miracle. His eyes are opened. And people are absolutely amazed. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same guy who used to sit and beg? And some of them claimed he was. I mean, they see this guy, they recognize him, they're like, he's usually holding his hand out. In fact, I've given him some money, right? And now maybe they're even wondering, have I been taken, right? I mean, could he just see the whole time? Others, they weren't so sure. They didn't really know. They said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, no, guys, I'm the guy. I'm the man, right? Imagine having to convince people that this thing has happened to you. But this didn't make any sense to them. So they said, how then were your eyes opened? And so he replied, continuing on, he replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see. I believed his words, even though I couldn't see him. Now, the people at this point, they're still not convinced about the situation. So where is this man? They asked him. Isn't that a great question for a blind guy? Where did he go? I don't know. I don't know, he said. I couldn't see. That's why I said, this is such a great account. I love this. And so there's this miraculous healing that takes place. And back in this time period, as I said, sin and suffering were connected. And so if a healing took place, that person needed to be taken to the religious leaders to try and verify and understand because, they're trying to make sense of this. They didn't have healings like this. And ailments were attributed to sin. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind to try and make sense of what's happening. And oh my goodness, does this stir things up? And here's why. Because the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was, a Sabbath. It's like, good grief, will he never learn? Is he just trying to kick the hornet's nest? What is he doing? And there happens to be a tradition of the elders that there's no kneading or making dough. And he spit in that mud, he mixed it around. It's akin to making dough. And there's a tradition about no healing on the Sabbath. People couldn't even be taken to the doctor unless they're dying. So all of a sudden, Jesus is not fitting the paradigm that they have created. Now you should know, this isn't God's law, this is man-made traditions. And what the man-made traditions are doing is elevating the law over the people the law was created to govern. They're valuing the law over compassion for those in need. And of course, the Pharisees are not very happy. Text says, therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Well, he put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. It's the same story I've been telling. I was blind, but now I see. But this didn't satisfy them. Some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, he is not from God. You know why? Because he does not keep the Sabbath. He does not obey our rules. He does not fit into our perfect little box that God is supposed to fit into. It was completely irrational. Now, others, they're starting to understand and they're starting to question and starting to wonder. Clearly, a miracle has taken place. Others ask, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they're divided. Signs. It's not just a miracle. This is kind of beyond just water becoming wine. This is getting to be significant. How does a sinner perform something like this? They're so confused. So then they turned again to the blind man. What do you have to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. Now put yourself in this guy's shoes. Just think about it. You've been blind since birth. You've never seen your parents. You've never seen a flower or sunsets. You've never seen anything. One day, Jesus comes up and rubs his little mud loogie in your eyes, and you wash, and your world has changed so drastically. And people are looking at you like, are you really the guy? We don't know. Did this actually happen? And they're kind of questioning your experience, but you haven't even been allowed in the temple. And now these religious people are putting you on the spot, asking all these questions. You've been given a gift. And they want to know, how did this happen? Who is this guy? And the man, he knows all this, and so he replied, he said, he's a prophet. There's something otherworldly going on here. Well, that was the wrong answer. They did not like this. They're like, does anybody know who this guy is, right? They still did not believe that he had been blind. They're like, this is just a plant. Jesus is setting us all up for a big joke. And he received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. So they bring his parents in, to try and verify this. Is this your son, they asked? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? Because this doesn't fit our box. Now the parents know that this is not a good situation because the religious leaders, they are very powerful, as I mentioned. And they have the power to kick a family out of the synagogue, which is essentially excommunicating them from the community. Community was very important. So they've got to tiptoe lightly as they're answering these questions and trying to make sense of what happens. They're a little bit afraid of being kicked out. So they try to avoid that. And here's what they said. We know he's our son, the parents answer. We know he was born blind, but how he can see or who opened his eyes, we're not really sure. We plead the fifth. So they add, ask him. He is of age, which means he was at least 13 years old when this took place. He will speak for himself. So they've admitted that a miracle happened, that the kid couldn't see, but now he can. But they're afraid of what these religious people might do to them. John says his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had, please don't miss these next words, already decided. They had made up their minds. They had the Son of God standing in their midst. They had the light of the world there to illuminate their darkness. And they missed it. See, here's the thing. Some people are born blind, but there are others who just choose it. And they don't want to see. And light had entered this very dark world. They were too blind to see it. They refused to acknowledge the light. John said they had already predecided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Now, their job was to watch for the Messiah. That was one of the roles of the religious leaders, to pay attention and point people in the direction of the Messiah. But they were so blinded by their assumptions. They were so blinded by their presuppositions. They were just content living in darkness. So how do we make this undeniable miracle fit inside our God box and fit the way we think it should happen? John says this, a second time they summoned the man who'd been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, because you're clearly not telling the truth. There's clearly something you're hiding from us. They said, we know this man is a sinner. Here's what we know, Jesus is a sinner. What are you hiding? Well, obviously this happened. Jesus is a sinner. Help us reconcile these two things. So the blind man replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. It's actually not my job. It's not my place to figure that out. He says, I actually don't know everything. But you know what? I don't need to know everything. You know why? Because there's actually something I do know. I don't know everything, but I know something, and here it is. I was blind, but now I see. I was blind, and then one day I encountered Jesus at the side of the road, and he put this mud in my eyes, and he told me to go wash, and my life has never been the same. One of the reasons why I love this account so much is because it's the account of so many of us in the room. So many of us who were blinded by our addictions, blinded by our attitudes, blinded by our fears, blinded by our sin. And then one day Jesus showed up. And it's like he put mud in our eyes and said, I want to help you see. And when you've seen, it's really hard to unsee. When you've experienced, it is so hard to go back. Because now we have hope. And now we have forgiveness. And now we have restoration. And now we have a future. Think about this future that this man had of seeing an entire world he had never seen before. That was his story. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, he said, I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Like, how many times do I have to tell you? And then he looks at them and says, do you want to become his disciples too? Ow. I mean, I don't know if this is sarcastic. I just maybe it's my own personality. I read the sarcasm in that, like, oh, you just want to be one of his disciples, right? Well, that did not go over well. Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know, here's what we know, that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. We have too many questions, too many uncertainties. He doesn't fit in our box. We're going to stick to what we can verify. And the man, the formerly blind man, he's taken back by this. He said, now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, but he opened my eyes. I mean, isn't it obvious? How much evidence do you need here? You're in the faith business, but you can't even figure this out. So let me help you figure it out. He says, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Which was the wrong thing to say, because to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. You deserve to be blind. And they sat on their theological high horses, looking at this man. And do you know what they were plagued with? Willful blindness. They didn't want to see. Not only did they not want to see, they refused to look. Whether because they were fearful, whether because they were arrogant, whether because it was just so uncomfortable. But they were so content not to know. And so instead, they chose to be blind. I was thinking about this, and it's so easy for us to sit on our own theological high horses and look at them and be like, how stupid could you possibly have been? I mean, how could you have been so blind? And then I think about the ways in which we choose to be blind. I think about how we resist science and scientific discoveries at times for fear that, it's going to upset my understanding of how creation happened, or, it's going to upset my understanding of how the world came about and how old it is. When I was in college, Taylor University, our president, he used to tell us, keep uncovering rocks. And if you find something that eats up Christianity, go worship that. But keep uncovering rocks. Don't be afraid of knowing. Don't be afraid of understanding. And yet there's so much fear at times of, it might upend what I know. It might take God out of my box, and I'm not sure. It just makes me so nervous. Sometimes we resist people who don't fit in our box. We disdain people who look different, act different, who don't fit what we think they should. And what's so interesting is we'll sing songs about God's mercy and God's grace, and we'll get all, the quiver in the liver and the tears in the eyes, and it'll be so meaningful. But we'll forget that it's while we were still sinners that Christ died for us. We at some point had to choose to receive that, just like somebody else at some point has to choose to receive it. So why wouldn't we show compassion to those who haven't had the blindness removed from their eyes yet? We're so afraid. And we fit God into our box. We're willfully blind. Some of you, you're just trying to wrestle with can I even believe in God? You're not sure what you believe, if you believe. And the question I have for you is, have you looked? Have you looked? Are you afraid to look? Are you afraid to surrender? I mean, that's one of the conversations I've had with people over the years. There's a fear of, if God is real and true, then that means I'm going to have to actually give something up. And there's this fear that I'm going to surrender something greater for something lesser. That if I invite God in, I'm going to be asked to do things that make me uncomfortable, and I don't want it, and it's not good. And I hear you on that, but as one on the other side, I can tell you it's been pretty good. Are you afraid to look? And if you are, is that wise? I mean, the light of the world was standing right there, and they refused to look. Or maybe you're at a point where you stopped believing because of the way some Christian acted somewhere. And you stopped believing because of what they did, and you saw the God of their box, and you thought, there's no way I want to worship that. But you know what? Chances are I don't want to worship that God either. And they probably put God in a box that doesn't even exist. But man, you meet somebody who truly knows and loves Jesus and lives their life as if he is king. Their lives aren't wrinkle-free. Their lives are not perfect, but there is something so compelling and so invitational. And I look at that, and I'm so thankful to have people like that in my life. And I say, I want to believe in that God. In fact, I want to be like those people who believe in that God. There is something so compelling. Don't be willfully blind. Did you know it's okay to be wrong? I mean, that's one of our fears. We're afraid to be wrong sometimes. I don't want to admit that I didn't know something or I was believing the wrong thing. I don't want to get lumped in with that group or those people. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, look at how much you've been wrong about your whole life up till now. My guess is you were wrong about something the last couple of weeks, right? It's okay. Stay curious. Investigate. Ask questions. John says, look, if you saw what I saw, if you could see what I saw, it would lead you to life. These are written so that you may experience life in his name. So as we close, I just want you to know, it's okay not to know. There are a lot of things in life we don't know. We're all learning, but that's not the problem. The problem is refusing to look when there is something to see. Being willfully blind, like a kid with his fingers in his ears. La, 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 I can't hear you. The other thing I would suggest is that you don't have to know everything to believe something. If you're waiting to reach the end of the frontiers of your own ignorance, you'll be waiting a long time. I'm just saying. For others of you, you have seen. And the reason you're afraid to share your story is because you still have some unanswered questions. And you're thinking, oh no, if somebody asks me, right? What I want you to know is those questions don't really matter. I once was blind, but now I see. That was the man's story. Have some boldness, have some courage to share what Jesus has done in your life. And he will reward that. God will reward that. Take your story, share it with others. They need to know, they need to see this isn't just blind faith. God is alive and at work today just as he was 2,000 years ago. Don't stop investigating. Don't stop asking questions. And don't stop sharing your story. We're going to pick it up there next week. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this account that has been recorded for the ages. What a great encounter. I can't imagine being that man who was physically blind, but I can't imagine being somebody spiritually blind and seeing something for the first time and knowing, oh my goodness, there is a God who cares so deeply for me. And he invites me to invite his kingdom to come into my world. And not just into my world for the good of me, but into the world around me for the good of others. God, would you give us courage, those of us who have been blind and can see, would you give us courage to share our stories, even if we have questions and uncertainties and we don't have everything answered. For the person who's just wrestling with if they can believe what they should believe, God, give them the courage to keep asking questions. Keep all of us from being willfully blind as we are invited into who you are. Thank you, God. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thanks for being here. I hope to see you all next Sunday. Have a great, drier week.